Thank you so much. Wow, that was fascinating. This has been a spectacular conference so far, so I'm just so proud of everyone. So come on up. We really pride ourselves on being able to invite and have expert journalists and short sellers, and the combination of those two groups of people is rich and exciting, and we find it fascinating. And now we've got two leaders. So I think, John, are you there? Are we able to see you? We're working on that. Okay, great. Here we go. And so we have John Gapper, a senior editor and columnist at the Financial Times. We've all been reading for many years, and we have Andrew Left of Citron Research, who we've all been reading for many years.
From the King of Spain to the King of Pain.
And Omid, I don't know how you're going to do this, but good luck.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm a sponsor of the event, but of course you gave me the toughest panel, so thank you for that. And it's been several years now since I've been participating, so congrats to you and your whole team for another successful conference. And I think Jim Chanos got me introduced to you guys about 4 or 5 years ago, and it's been a real pleasure. And I feel a bit of duality when I participate because my day job is the enemy of most people in this room as a banker and SPAC sponsor. But I do have an academic interest in the material, and I'm excited to speak with both of you today. I think it's important to start with the macro environment because it is a different one. For the first time in almost over a decade now, we're entering a period of high rates. The Fed is trying to pull the money out, and we're going to see what's really behind the curtain. And so with that said, maybe let me start with you as to what happens in times like this when the going gets tough. Is this a ripe environment for observing and finding fraud that you may have not otherwise seen?
So we were talking. Okay, so we were talking about this beforehand. He said, "What do you want to, discuss?" We said, "Well, going forward with short selling," I said, "it's going to be interesting to see over the next few years as money's not so free. Behind every stock, why do people commit fraud? Behind every stock, with a CEO, they're married to those symbols. People forget the fact that when they go home, their kids know they're the CEO of this company, and their friends, the people at the clubs, the maitre d' at the restaurant, and your ego gets so entrenched with that company and your identity by it. So it's fine when everyone's stock is going higher, then your stock is going lower. You're like, well, everyone's stock is going lower. And then maybe next year you're supposed to grow 30%. You find out you're only going to grow 10%. Now it's where it gets interesting. Because you thought it was bad when your stock was down 50, 60%, and you could at least say it, right? And now you have to make that decision. That's where being a CEO is a very difficult thing, and being a CFO and managing that company is understanding the fact that, hey, there's business cycles, or maybe your business is just not the right business right now. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you the story really fast because I was telling it last night with Jim Carruthers. There was a company called ArthroCare. I don't know who remembers ArthroCare a few years ago. Yeah, Roddy Boyd. Maybe 5, 6 years ago, CEO couldn't deal with the fact that he was going to miss numbers, set up a fake distributor, created a mini fraud within a real company. And his stock went from, let's just say quickly, $50 to $3. He got indicted. The CFO got indicted. By the time he went to trial, this company got resold for $50 a share. As we speak right now, he's doing 20 years in Texas at a federal penitentiary. And because he just could not separate his ego, understand that he's going to miss a few quarters or maybe even miss a year from the real business. Right. And that's how frauds are, and that's an extreme to it, right? So I think we'll see situations in the next few years with changing macro conditions, stocks that are already down 60%, 70%, that are real companies will become frauds just because of the ego attached between the name and the person. As a fund manager, like tomorrow I can close positions and I can make another stock my biggest position. What does that make a difference? Right. They're just numbers. It's a symbol to me. Not my company. As CEO, it doesn't have that choice.
So John, let me bring you in from across the pond. So the kind of toxic brew of capital markets being closed with ego, does that make for a dangerous period for investors?
Well, I guess there have always been periods for investors. I was very struck by what Jim Chanos said about fraud has been a profitable investment strategy for during this past, well, maybe 20 years in a bull market, and as stocks, as all sorts of financial assets are rising, it leaves lots of gaps for fraud to take place. And what Andrew is saying is the same thing happens on the way down. The other thing that really struck me was this question from the second panel that that the amount of tax complexity and the amount of arbitrage in the way instruments are regulated has allowed, again, a tremendous amount of room for fraud. So there's really been a very kind of pregnant period, I think, for people to not only commit fraud, but actually kind of get away with it, and other people to sort of admire the grey area where they're making money, even though everybody doesn't know it can continue. So now we've turned the corner. It's kind of a different environment.
So on the topic of instruments, a lot has been written on Bill Hwang, but you told me that you have a fresh perspective on something that may even implicate some of the largest banks.
Well, yeah, and where's Bethany? Because no one wrote on this.
She
one yet.
left,
Okay.
but
So, yeah, in order to have a fraud, it takes a community to commit a fraud, right? You have to facilitate it somehow. Good fraud. And what's amazing for people who follow the markets, a few years ago there was a company, GSX, Chinese education company, and you didn't have to be a financial forensic genius to know there was one of two things. Either this company was the greatest business model ever created in the history of business. I'm talking better than early stage Google, better than when Facebook went mobile. This was like the highest margins, highest return, or it was a fraud. That was it. There was nothing in between. Their customer acquisition cost was like 1/10 of their customers, and they also got 10 times more revenue from the same customer. Everything about it made no sense. And the stock went from 20 to 140, and I think 3 years ago, it was the #1 performing stock of the New York Stock Exchange. Who was the largest shareholder? If you looked at Bloomberg, Goldman Sachs. Who was the second largest shareholder on Bloomberg? Morgan Stanley. Nobody knew. How many days did I sit and bang my head against the wall? You think I can make a phone call and call Goldman Sachs to, hi, can I please speak to the person who cut? No, it was a complete black box. So Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, let's just say Goldman Sachs, was the largest shareholder of the #1 performing stock on the New York Stock Exchange. And no one in the risk department, nowhere ever said, who's covering this? Like, whose stock is this? What's happening? And then, as you know the story, when Bill Hwang collapsed, and it was a whole shit show, and they were in a game of prisoner's dilemma, and Goldman Sachs sold the stock before Morgan Stanley sold the stock, and let's put it this way, they all were able to get out, and people who own the stock, or if you were short the stock, it went to 140, 150. Everyone writes about Bill Hwang. Have we seen anything about Morgan Stanley's involvement, Goldman Sachs' involvement in this? No. In order for Bill Hwang to facilitate what he did, he would need to execute those swaps, and you would have to tell me that this went through complete Goldman Sachs' risk department, their compliance department, without ever recognizing the fact that they owned 30% of the #1 performing stock of the New York Stock Exchange. Unheard of.
John, Bill Hwang also has notable ties to Cathie Wood, and I want to bring her up in the context of the cult of personality. And particularly over the past several years during the coronavirus period, the notion of retail participation in the markets. There's a notion that this is the democratization of capital markets, but what some of the pitfalls and concerns, if any, you have about retail's increased participation in the way that the markets are working or not working?
Well, I think that it is an interesting time because there's a whole bunch of retail investors who come into the market, and there's lots of questions about the psychology of bull markets and of fraud separately. So, we heard about the King of Spain and his social capital, and people just wanted to do something for the King of Spain and be associated with him. I think, as Diana Henriques has pointed out in her book, people wanted, Bernie Madoff built an image and people wanted in, people were competing to get into that fraud, as it turned out. Now, with a load of retail and people coming into the market and wanting to push stocks up, the short sellers have been really quite unpopular, and I'm sure Andrew can tell us about that. And I think that the possibility of a fraudster creating a cult of personality to the point where nothing can really stop them, no amount of questions, no amount of press coverage asking
Okay. Can you hear us?
I can
Kathy
hear.
Wood got to him.
Yeah.
Fast.
Okay, yeah, so you were saying about the inability to stop a cult of personality. That's where we lost you, if you want to complete the thought.
I thought I completed it, which is there comes a point in that run up where no questions are asked. I think we heard from the journalist saying, you can ask questions about these things, but unless you get really, really hard evidence, and I'm not talking about Kathy Wood because that's not a fraud. It's just a question of a momentum market of somebody saying, I really believe in this stuff. And so you will get these herds of movement behind it. And I think separately from the Kathy Wood phenomenon, from the Elon Musk phenomenon, it's also a time when a lot of frauds can take place because people don't want to have awkward questions asked. It's not what they want.
So on that note, since he brought him up, what's the difference between Elon Musk, let's also Andrew Newman from WeWork, and Elizabeth Holmes?
I mean, it's going to be a riddle one day, right? Elizabeth Holmes hurt people.
Okay.
You do fake blood tests, that's actually beyond stocks, beyond any kind of money. That's if you take away all securities fraud or anything else, you're giving people fake blood tests. That's hurting people. Newman was just a wonderful character. He made a lot of money. You asked the question, did he make a lot of money for doing nothing? Like, well, look out these windows. Half the city's made a lot of money for doing nothing, really, or what are you going to say? I mean, without naming any specific hedge funds who, if you look at the money that they've taken in versus their ultimate return at the end, have made a lot of money for doing nothing. I say, go look at the guy with the jackhammer. He's doing something, making money. So Newman,
did he earn his money?
No, he made like everyone else. I mean, if Massa wanted to give him the valuation, he was able to take money out. The bankers were able to do it. He played the system, and that's it. What are you going to say? He's an interesting character, right? And that's why we're kind of amazed. They made a great movie about him, and Jared Leto did a nice job. So, and we all were amazed by it. But he played the system, right? And Elon is a whole different bird, obviously. That's not just a cult of personality. He is, and admittedly, and I was short Tesla for a while. I actually say I'm short a little bit now, nothing, just a small amount, because I now have FOMO that it might actually finally go down now when I'm not there. So I'm only there for FOMO. But it's so easy to play the man and not the ball. And you looked at him, and I asked the question. I said, "Where have you seen before?" I wanted to ask it to Jim. I asked it to the journalist that comes across your desk as, "Oh, this is a definite fraud," and it wasn't a fraud. When you first saw Elon and he came on the scene, you're like, "Oh God, this is going to blow up fast," right? And sure enough, it didn't, and it kept momentum. And you're like, "Oh, these batteries aren't going to last," and they did. "Oh, no one's going to want to buy this," and they did. So it checked off a lot of the check marks, right? But as crazy as he is, and there's so many different adjectives you can assign to him right now. You cannot put him in the same sentence with Elizabeth Holmes or Adam Newman.
So he's obviously had his, give and take, for lack of a better phrase, with the SEC. Why do you think, maybe, and I don't know if you think this, some people do, that he's been dealt with kid gloves. Is there politics behind that? Did he represent something?
I'm sure some people, first of all, there's a populism to it. There's a populism to everything right now. Right. And that just seems to be the way that policy is done, right? I think the world would be quite upset if he got indicted on securities fraud. And you could say he deserves it or not deserve it. There's a populist movement for him somehow. Okay, so maybe the government sits behind the scenes and says this end justifies the means, and maybe we'll make him a one of one. And it's only been the SEC. And as I was telling you, I don't really think he cares about the SEC. What are they going to fine him? Go ahead, fine me, right? He'd care about the DOJ. He'd care about anything else, but I don't think he cares about the board. He doesn't really care. He doesn't seem to care about much. He cares about a lot. Obviously, doesn't seem to care about the regulators.
Well, it seems to me that his bedfellows have changed over the past several years. So I think this is a guy that was probably looked at as a champion of perhaps the green movement by some circles, and now he's toying with a different crowd.
Now he's putting his head in the mouth of the lion because he's going into politics.
Right.
He wants to go into politics. And that's probably, as I was saying, the Peter principle. You rise to that highest level of incompetence. He's, as someone you could see by his personality, also he just loves to touch the oven, feels it's hot, and has to touch it again just to make sure it's hot. And You know, and sure enough, he's going to get burned, and he sees it now. It almost like he wants to see what happens.
John, do you have any predictions on what happens now that Elon has announced that he's terminating his pursuit of Twitter?
I mean, I guess my only prediction is the Delaware court may have something to say about it. But I don't know. I mean, he's defied gravity for an awfully long time, sometimes literally. So I guess we'll see. I mean, I wanted to ask Andrew actually a question about his own situation, which is, I read somewhere that his house got raided by the FBI, and I also read that a whole bunch of short sellers, like last year, basically had got sick of not making money for a really long time, because in a period or when the market was going up and up and up and up, logical short bets were just losing propositions. So I want to ask him, is he feeling happier now?
Happier that my house got raided, or happier as the shorts? I mean, you know, once your house gets raided, it's like one of the things you can't unsee, right? And it's funny, if your house has ever, not to make a joke of it, if anyone has ever had the pleasure of having the FBI, they don't work one agent at a time. So my neighbors in my neighborhood must have thought I was running like some international drug cartel or something. And it's like, no, it's not like that. And I really don't know. So, you know, and as for short selling, it was almost probably, I swear to you, I think the day, if this was done in motion picture format, the day the market was starting to top out and things were heavy, was like the day my doorbell's ringing at the same time, and GameStop, and there was so much that was happening socially at the same time to make it happen. But it was tough to make money as a short seller for years, but we seemed to do it. You know, it was, I didn't, mind it. What made it more difficult was when people didn't mind, when you say the meme stock, or, if you remember, like Rocket Mortgage one day went up 100% or something like that. So if you were over allocated into that stock, who would have thought that would happen, right? So how you balance your book became a lot different as a short seller. You couldn't stay as concentrated in specific names. I was making a comment that I got divorced in 2006, and in 2007, I was pretty much all in on one stock. I was just all in. It was zero borrow fees. It was 100% fraud. I knew it. It was Home Solutions of America. Again, Roddy knows that one. It was like, there you go. I was either going to live with my mother or make this all back. We're good. And the stock went to zero, and they all went to jail. It was all good. But if you put that same company today, it would be 120% borrow fee. At any day, somebody could just go on the stock. It would have gone from 10 to 40, and I'd be living with my mother. So you can't do that anymore. So the dynamics of the market have changed for a short seller, no doubt. As for the DOJ, hopefully one day the government will realize that this boogeyman of short sellers doesn't exist. And I don't even know what they think. What do the short sellers do? Like, short sellers meet in a cave and say, let's destroy, ask people all the time. Give me one company that's ever been destroyed by a short seller. It just doesn't, it's just, the whole thing's nonsensical. But we all live in, I understand, I live in a system, and this is the United States of America, and it's a good system, and it's not always perfect, but I have to play within the system, so that's it.
Aren't there, so obviously there's structural shifts that you're pointing out in the system that make it much more difficult to do what you used to do. Why is it not the case that journalists, the Department of Justice, regulators, and short sellers, aren't they on the same side? Why is it acrimonious?
Well, first of all, journalists not. I mean, feel bad for journalists, because right now, because of activist short sellers, the world's in hyperspeed. So I heard them say, if you're looking at a story, it's taking you 9 months to the story, and then your editor says, well, did you speak to management? Did you speak? By the time you're there, it's been written about on Twitter 1,000 times, and you're reporting yesterday's news. So that's one thing. As for the regulators, they're on the sides of no one.
Okay.
They're on the sides of the regulators. And they change quite often. Their policy changes, what they're looking at changes. I think they want to try easy cases. I go look at SEC all the time, SEC.gov, and go look at what they try. It's some guy who stole like $65,000 selling illegal stakes in horse races. I'm like, what are you doing? I just think they want to win, because many of the attorneys at the SEC, they're working there, so the next job is going to be someplace else at a firm. And they don't want to have a loss under their belt because they're not going to get the job at the firm. So, it's a lot easier if you're looking for your batting record, right, or your winning percentage, right, to be 35-0, and nobody cares who your opponents are. Elon Musk is a tough opponent.
I think, and I'd love to hear either your thoughts on this, though, the community that kind of comprises crypto or SPACs would feel that this current SEC is actually quite tough. Do either of you agree with that?
Oh, because they haven't made enough money. I mean, the crypto people and how they feel with the SEC, it's a beautiful love-hate, right? We shouldn't be regulated. Oh, who's going to get my money back? You choose it, right? So it's just nonsensical.
Well, they say they're making a lot of money for people in the Bahamas, and they should be able to move.
By the way, that actually pisses me off to watch Sam, SBF, who's the Federal Reserve for crypto, right? That's his new job, okay. And as he sits, and if you ever go to the Bahamas and I think it's like Albany, him and his people have bought like half the resort out.
40% of the GDP of the country is from that.
Great. So he makes all the money, gets all the press, gets everything, doesn't pay the tax. That's a wonderful world we live in, right? And the DOJ wants to know about me. I mean, this guy's backstopping crypto. That's a crazy. He's even has the hair for an evil genius, right? But whatever. And as for the SPAC market, yes, they were quite. I mean, they let it happen, but there were many SPAC operators who were too aggressive on the projections, and they were maybe a year behind the curve by realizing it. Going forward, it'll be different. So, like everything else, there were some bad players, there were some good players. Valuations got stretched. Where's Nate? There you go. Market became super efficient. Nate did a great job last year, and along with some other guys, and just kept the efficiency of that market, and that's it. Nothing's going to be perfect. The market's never going to be perfect in always. And that's the importance of short sellers, is to keep the efficiency.
John?
Well, I don't have much to say about the SEC, but I've got a bit to say about journalism. And I appreciate Andrew's good wishes about journalism. I mean, it seems to me that there's a bunch of problems with journalism to do with fundamental research. And the panel mentioned, in the global financial crisis, a lot of it was written with hindsight. It's actually remarkable, I think, that you've had cases like Theranos, where John Carreyrou at the Wall Street Journal was writing about it in real time, and Wirecard, where Dan McCrum and various of my colleagues were writing about it in real time, up against not only what they were saying on Twitter, but what investment bank researchers were saying, you can, and Wirecard did indeed hire a bunch of private detectives, and indeed some of London's, I'm not going to say best law firms, but certainly very expensive ones, to try to shut it down. So there's massive amounts of pressure, and you've got to kind of stick with it through that. And then the second problem is, whenever there's a fraud, people say it reads like a thriller. Well, in some cases it does, but I mean, with all due respect, in a lot of cases it doesn't read like a thriller, because the problem is it's incredibly complicated. And to actually get the reader to follow along, and for a publication to have the commitment to go on with writing story after story after story, where most readers are going to get lost in the weeds of exactly how the cum-ex scandal works and what it is anyway, there's a lot of disincentives for journalism to actually do this work.
On the topic of journalism and some of its challenges, have you found that the move to a subscription business model has changed journalism fundamentally during your tenure?
I mean, I'm still here, so in that sense, it's helped. Having joined the sunset industry 40 years ago, I still seem to be here, surprisingly. I think for a few select publications, subscription was the only way to go, and it has worked in the sense that, it does concentrate you on what the readers really want, and trying to serve the reader, and trying to provide some level of in-depth coverage, as opposed to the free publications which just want to get clicks. But we still live in the world of Twitter. We still live in the world of social media. We still live in the world where a bunch of people who want to talk up a stock can sledge journalists online. And so it does actually, it's in some ways, we are still here, we're still fighting, but it's not an easy world. I'm not gonna, and journalists don't make money on the way up, and they don't make money on the way down. So God knows why we do it, apart from some sort of misplaced sense, or maybe correctly placed sense, of moral probity.
The Financial Times did a nice job. I said with my when I was with Evergrande, they were extremely fair, consistently doing Evergrande coverage years ago before it was popular. So.
But John, do you
Well,
find
thank you.
that some of the budding technology, like a platform like Substack, can be a solution in that journalists can kind of be their own brand, where folks can purchase the ability to have a direct relationship with the writer?
Right. Well, I mean, that could be the case, but one thing I mean, I think that Substack and the movement towards an individual writing about what they're really interested in and pursuing it with a subscription base, which in some senses makes them a little bit more like a sort of equity analyst or a short seller actually doing some fundamental research. That bit's good. The bit that's bad is that if you take the case of Wirecard, you needed all of the resources of the FT and to stand up in the London courts against massive pressure and money being thrown at us by a fraudster, by a fraudulent organization, which had a lot of money to spend because it was a fraud, to try to shut it down. And I wouldn't want to be a single journalist without the backing of the resources of a major newspaper publication behind me. And by the way, it was a real stretch even for us. And in the end, we won and we were seen to have triumphed, but it wasn't easy. And we ran story after story, effectively saying this is a fraud, and the share price stayed up for a really long time until the whole thing finally collapsed.
Right, so when you have everyone coming at you, like being alone with GameStop, talk us through that whole experience and
Well, as for legal fees, I can tell you that sucks, honestly. And I probably say, look, I'm not the Financial Times, and they don't really care sometimes. But yeah, so for a while, early in my career, I was being sued all the time when I was writing on the smaller companies. And when they sued you, you kind of knew you were really right. And but you still had to fight it. I actually had one lawyer who used to make a business of I'd write on a company, he'd go to them and suing them. I was being sued 4 times by one lawyer. And yeah, we won all of them. So when they come after you, he's talking about online. I mean, people are just becoming more mean. I'm young. I think I'm young. I'm 52, but I just don't have the fight in me. I just don't see. There's a new generation of people who hide online or use Twitter or use Substacks, and it's just mean. I just don't know where it comes from. I don't have that in my body. And I get the fact that we could disagree on stocks, and I get the fact that if you're going to play the game and you make money, you lose money. It is what it is. I don't get that next level. And that's what you see online. And that's what I just felt uncomfortable about the world right now. And that was pretty much for me, stepping back from it more. And I just didn't want to deal with it. And as for, it's funny with Wirecard, the difficulties of being a short seller, I was maybe like 3 blocks away from here 9 years ago. I just looked on my phone, I was discussing last night, it was around 9 years ago, and I was pitched Wirecard as a short. It was a great story. The stock was $26 or $27. And look where it went, and then look what happens if you were short. I think one of the greatest things that ever happened to me is for some reason, the only reason why I wasn't short Valiant earlier is I don't know, I just wasn't. I know, I mean, Mr. Chanos knew the story a long time ago, long before I was involved. And I just very fortunate, right place, right time, but the timing on it. So even if you have the fraud, Wirecard was fraud, who knows how long it could play out. And then when you get right on the fraud, who knows what kind of aggravation you're going to deal with? Who knows how the judge is going to rule that day? With Evergrande, millions of dollars in legal fees. It went nowhere, right? I don't get my money, time, or efforts back. So right now, look, in some of these cases, when you're fighting these companies, it's not a jihad. I'm not a superhero. Life is life. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a person.
So last time we had a downturn that was significant, there was, some fraud that happened abroad in Asia in particular that we all saw around 2009 and 2010. In addition, there were the reverse mergers that were coming out of China that turned out not to be, because people were looking for something else to make money during this period. To end for both of you, where do you see some potential fraud or an area that people should be wary of?
I think crypto.
Okay.
I mean, it's just complete fraud, over and over and over. I mean, And when it does unravel which part of it, I'm not going to speak about which part individually at what point. I have my own investment opinions on which ones. We're going to look back at this historically and go, oh my God, this is going to make
So to you, crypto are like tulips, is it the same?
a big part of, let's just call DeFi, Web3, crypto, every different name you want to put. If I could somehow short Andreessen Horowitz's new fund, I would.
Okay. John?
I kind of agree. I mean, I think the thing about crypto is it combines lots of kind of really juicy elements of like moral fervor, something that kind of is incredibly complex but doesn't really seem to make sense, but is sort of kept up like a hot air balloon. Some fundamental truth below it all about a technology that could be useful, and a massive amount of leverage, and a whole bunch of investors who've kind of flooded into the market and not really experienced a crash before. So all of that stuff, there must be a ton of abuse out there, and it's almost like hiding in plain sight. It's the emperor's new clothes.
Well, please join me in thanking both of our panelists.